Vision is probably our most relied upon sense. We learn about objects, posture, space, distance. We verify information, but it can be overridden, such as in three-dimensional movies that are so popular now. If you have a low vision sense, you're sensitive to lights, to clutter. You use your peripheral vision a lot. You'll see many children with autism who will only look out of the side of their eyes, and that could be a combination of sensory issues. High thresholds, you're seeking bright lights and movement. You want something to register in your brain visually. Many times you'll see unusual visual kinds of things, such as an empty gaze where they're looking, but there's no kind of comprehension looking in their eyes. Peripheral gaze, avoiding eyes. Focuses on physical features. I used to have one kiddo who really loved eyebrows, and he would really focus in on one physical features, and thereby he disregarded what the whole face was doing. So he may look like he's looking at you, but really he's staring at his eyebrow. They may have strength in visual processing with focus on details, and environmental structure and task demands may influence eye contact. So because they will tend to use one sensory system at a time, they may be able to touch but not look and touch, or look but not touch and look. Listen and touching may not be able to be done together. All of those kinds of different sensory systems, that integration can go awry. Auditory system. We certainly have lots of children with problems with noise, mainly because we think that all the information comes to their senses with equal importance. In other words, their body is not screening out irrelevant stimuli. So there's a fan on and that's all they're focusing on. They're hearing everything, rather than being able to just kind of put the fan into the background and not think about it. Their hearing acuity is usually normal. Sometimes they'll say, oh, kids with autism have hypersensitive hearing, and that's not true. It's what they do with that hearing that is important. They may show a preference for non-human sounds over human sounds, which we talked about earlier, and difficulty screening out human voices from background voices. And so if we're thinking about joint attention with symbols, if they're having trouble weeding out that background voice, that's a problem. So people with low thresholds for noise are very agitated with noise, or come unglued by the fire alarm, things like that. High threshold for noise are oblivious to noise. And I've actually had children who would come unglued if a fire alarm went off, but at the same time oblivious when I'm calling their name. And I think those kids are the kids that kind of are the one sense kids. They either have their ears turned on or have them off. So depending on whether they're on or off depends on their reaction. So we need to have good sensory integration. We need a balance between arousal and soothing, right? If we aren't aroused enough, we are sleeping. If we're not soothed enough, we're anxious and having difficulty doing anything because we're so aroused. And this balance will be different for each individual. So an underreaction may be a result of overstimulation, and that stereotypies, the finger flapping and things like that, may be a result of children trying to seek this balance within their own body. So let's talk about stereotypies. What stereotypies are repetitious motor or posturing behaviors that have no apparent functional effects on the environment. And this is really normal as babies and infants for them to do that because they've discovered their hands or their toes or their feet and involved in motor development and how they move, but that persists in some children with disabilities. Self-stimulatory behaviors seem to give some kind of pleasure, and it's often common in 9 to 12 months, but children with autism, because we think because of their abnormal sensory processing, either find this more pleasurable or seek it to find that balance. Ritualistic behaviors also have their role. Sensory systems seem to play a role here. Adherence to routines, lining up things, holding an object in the same way, playing with toys in the same way. All of that can be because of their motor planning, but also could be because of the pleasure that the sensory system is giving them. And the ritualistic behaviors really do serve important functions. They reduce our stress and help us achieve that balance. You know, when you're very upset or you've had a long day or you feel ill, we all have our ritualistic behaviors that we do under stress or anxiety or illness, and we need to reduce it, and we're trying to achieve some kind of normalcy within our. We know that there is a biological need for stimulation. Prolonged or sensory deprivation leads to impaired development. We know this. It can lead to atrophy of senses. It can lead to sense distortions. And too much stimulation, we know, results in withdrawal, and can also be tied to emotional disturbances that come as a result of that. And that's reflected in torture methods, right? Sensory deprivation or too much stimulation are commonly used as torture methods because neither one of those are the right kind of balance for us as biological human beings.